The night before Mother's Day, my mom tagged me in the family chat and wrote, "Stay home, do not come. We are tired of your side of the family." My dad and my sister simply reacted with likes like they agreed. I replied, "So that is what we are to you." They ignored me and kept joking about their next vacation, not realizing what they had just triggered. 5 minutes later, the group chat exploded. 10:05 p.m. My sister, 10 p.m. My mom, 10:15 p.m. My dad. All tagging me nonstop in absolute panic. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family who completely underestimated your power. My name is Nia and I am 32 years old. As I stood in my penthouse apartment overlooking the glittering Atlanta skyline, I stared at the glowing screen of my phone. A glass of dark red wine rested in my hand, but the bitter taste in my mouth had nothing to do with the drink. The message from my mother Yvonne stared back at me, serving as a blunt dismissal of my entire existence. For 32 years, my family had treated me like a stain on their perfect portrait. But tonight, they crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They targeted my 7-year-old daughter, Zara. Tomorrow was supposed to be Mother's Day, but in my family, Mother's Day was never about breakfast in bed or handmade cards. For my mother, it was the social event of the season. She was hosting a massive charity gala to launch her new philanthropic foundation. It was designed to gather the absolute upper crust of Atlanta's Black elite. We are talking local politicians, wealthy business owners, and prominent church leaders. For weeks, my mother had been obsessing over the seating charts, the floral arrangements, and the press coverage to ensure she maintained her precious status in our community. The gala was being held at the Sterling Estate, an exclusive historic mansion known for hosting only the most prestigious events in the state. I had originally been invited, but strictly in a behind-the-scenes capacity. My family always assumed I was just a struggling freelance event coordinator because I had dropped out of law school a decade ago. They thought I spent my days scrambling for pennies and running errands. But then came the group chat message banning me completely. I knew exactly where the directive came from. It came from Preston. Preston is my 38-year-old brother-in-law, a white wealth manager who married my older sister, Chloe. From the moment Preston entered our family, he brought with him a suffocating air of superiority. He paraded his Wall Street title around like a crown, looking down on anyone who did not match his tax bracket. He completely controlled Chloe, and by extension, he controlled my parents. My father, Harrison, a retired executive, constantly sought Preston's financial advice and allowed him to dictate family dynamics. Earlier that evening, Preston had complained to my parents about my daughter, Zara. Zara is on the autism spectrum. She is a brilliant, beautiful, and sensitive little girl who sometimes gets overwhelmed by loud noises and crowds. Preston had the audacity to send a message to my mother saying that they could not risk having Zara at the gala. He actually wrote that a neurodivergent child throwing a tantrum would ruin the luxury aesthetic and embarrass the family in front of his high-net-worth investors. He called my daughter a liability. Instead of defending her own granddaughter, my mother agreed with him. My father supported it. My sister Chloe, who is entirely obsessed with her designer wardrobe and country club status, chimed in to say that my side of the family was just too much work to accommodate. They decided it was easier to cut us out entirely so they could sip champagne without the burden of our presence. This was not the first time Preston had disrespected my family, while my parents nodded along. My mind drifted back to a Sunday dinner at my parents' house just last year. Sunday dinners are a sacred tradition in our community, but that night, it felt like an execution. My husband Malik is an incredible man. He is a phenomenal chef and the most supportive partner I could ask for. During that dinner, Malik was helping my mother carve the turkey. Preston leaned back in his chair, swirled his bourbon, and loudly joked that it was nice of the family to let the hired cook sit at the table with the real adults. The entire table laughed. My parents chuckled. Chloe smirked. They all knew Malik was my husband, But because he worked in the culinary world, they deemed him beneath their corporate standards. They viewed him as just a guy who cooked food for a living. They viewed me as the rebellious failure who quit law school to sit in front of a computer screen all day. We took the insult in stride that night because Malik and I shared a secret that made their arrogance utterly laughable. We chose to protect our peace rather than engage in a screaming match with people committed to misunderstanding us. But tonight was different. Attacking me was one thing, attacking my husband was another, but trying to erase my autistic daughter because she did not fit into their shallow picture-perfect narrative was the final straw. I took a slow sip of my wine and looked back at my phone. The group chat was still active. Preston had just sent a message boasting about the $5 million investment fund he was going to launch at the gala tomorrow. My mother was sending heart emojis. They were actively celebrating my exclusion, completely blind to the reality of the situation. They thought I was sitting in a cramped apartment crying over their rejection. They thought I was mourning the loss of a family that had never truly loved me. They thought I was a helpless failure scrambling to pay bills. But they had no idea what I had been doing for the last 10 years since I left law school. They had no idea that I taught myself to code. They had no idea that I founded Noir Tech, a cybersecurity firm that now protected the data of half the banks in the South. And they certainly had no idea that my company was recently valued at $40 million. They also did not know the truth about Malik. Yes, he is a chef, but he is not a hired cook. He is the chief executive officer of a premium culinary supply chain that owns several high-end restaurants and catering services across the city. We built our empires in absolute silence. We let them believe their own delusions because their toxic judgment was the perfect camouflage. I set my wine glass down on the marble counter. A cold calm washed over me. I was not going to cry. I was not going to argue with them in the group chat. I was not going to beg for a seat at a table where I was clearly despised. Instead, I was going to let them have exactly what they wanted. I was going to let them walk right into the spotlight they craved so desperately. I opened my tablet and pulled up the master control system for my holding company. My mother was so proud of securing the Sterling estate for her gala. She had bragged for months about the exclusivity of the venue, the high cost of the rental, and the strict management team that only approved the absolute best clients. She thought booking that mansion validated her status in the elite circles of Atlanta. What my mother, father, sister, and arrogant brother-in-law did not know, as they laughed at me through their phone screens, was one very simple, very dangerous fact. They did not know that a holding company had quietly acquired the Sterling estate and all its operational contracts just 3 weeks ago. And they had absolutely no idea that the holding company belonged to me. I watched the little green loading bar on my secure dashboard fill to completion. With one deliberate tap of my index finger, I bypassed the standard estate management protocol and accessed the master booking registry for the Sterling estate. My mother's gala was listed right at the top. Yvonne's Philanthropic Gala. Platinum package. Fully catered. 500 guests. The payment method on file was Preston's black corporate card. A cold smile spread across my face as I hit cancel. The system prompted me for a reason. I typed in 3 simple words. Financial irregularities detected. I confirmed the cancellation and set my tablet down. 10 years ago, they would have said I was incapable of executing a digital takeover. Back then, I was suffocating under the crushing weight of my family's expectations. I was supposed to be the perfect Spelman College legacy, the brilliant daughter destined for a prestigious corporate law firm. But the deeper I got into my first year of law school, the more I realized I was living my mother's dream, not mine. I hated the suffocating traditionalism. I wanted to build systems, not argue within broken ones. So I dropped out. The fallout from that decision was catastrophic. My mother did not just express disappointment. She actively campaigned to destroy my self-esteem. She stood in the center of our family living room and called me the ultimate disgrace of the Spelman alumni. She told me I was throwing away my life, that I would never amount to anything, and that she was embarrassed to claim me in front of her friends. Chloe, of course, reveled in my downfall, instantly securing her spot as the undisputed golden child. They wrote me off as a failure. They had no idea that while they were busy gossiping about my ruined future, I was staying up until 4 in the morning teaching myself complex programming languages. I traded law textbooks for coding boot camps. I built firewalls, designed security protocols, and eventually created noir tech right out of my cramped studio apartment. I turned my so-called failure into a $40 million cybersecurity empire while they were busy polishing their country club memberships. My phone vibrated violently against the marble counter, snapping me back to the present. Exactly 5 minutes had passed since I canceled the booking. The group chat, which had been previously filled with cruel jokes about cutting me out of the family, was now a digital war zone. Chloe sent a message in all caps asking what was happening. My mother sent a barrage of crying emojis followed by a frantic voice note. I did not even have to press play to know the sheer panic in her voice. Then came the message from my father. He demanded to know why the estate manager just called them to announce that the gala was officially canceled. I watched the messages pour in, reading the chaotic updates in real time. The estate manager had informed my mother that the venue's secure payment system flagged Preston's credit card for severe financial irregularities. The transaction was blocked, the reservation was voided, and the venue was now legally required to deny them entry. My mother was losing her mind. She typed that she had 500 elite guests expecting a red carpet rollout in less than 24 hours. The caterers were scheduled to arrive at dawn. The local press had already set up their media tents. Chloe demanded that Preston fix it immediately, asking how his corporate card could possibly bounce. Preston was frantically typing, his usual arrogant silence completely shattered. He claimed it was a glitch, a bank error, an incompetent system failure that he would resolve immediately. I stood there in the quiet luxury of my penthouse, watching the people who had just tried to erase my daughter scramble in absolute terror. They were utterly helpless. They had built their entire identities on wealth and access, and with one keystroke I had locked them out of their own kingdom. Then the group chat notifications suddenly stopped. The screen went dark for a split second before lighting up again with an incoming call. It was not my mother begging for help. It was not my father trying to manage the crisis. The caller ID flashed with Preston's name. The great Wall Street wealth manager was calling the college dropout. He was probably furious, assuming that since I used to work freelance event gigs, I could somehow pull some strings with the venue staff. He was calling to throw his weight around to demand that I fix the mess he thought a broken computer system had caused. He was calling to teach me a lesson about corporate leverage and legal threats. I took a deep breath, letting the satisfaction settle deep in my chest, and pressed answer. The moment my finger tapped the glowing green button, Preston's voice blasted through the speaker, filling the quiet expanse of my living room. I did not say a single word. I simply switched the call to speakerphone, tossed the device onto my marble coffee table, and began to pace. My bare feet moved silently across the hardwood floor as I walked the length of the room, letting his frantic arrogance wash over me. I wanted to hear every single inflection of his panic. I wanted to let him dig his own grave with his own tongue. "Nia, listen to me very closely," he barked. His tone was not the panicked pitch of a man who had just lost everything. It was commanding and aggressive, dripping with the suffocating entitlement of a man who had never once been told no in his entire life. The payment system at the Sterling estate is experiencing a catastrophic glitch. They are trying to claim my corporate black card was flagged for severe irregularities. It is an absolute joke. I need you to fix this immediately. I kept walking, stopping by the floor-to-ceiling windows to look down at the glowing Atlanta traffic below. I let the silence stretch across the line. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was terrified. His entire reputation was hanging by a thread, but his fragile ego would never allow him to show that fear to me. He needed a scapegoat, and he needed someone to order around. "I know you used to scramble around doing those little freelance event planning gigs when you dropped out of law school." He continued, his voice taking on that familiar condescending edge that always made my blood boil. You know the staff at these venues. You know the catering managers and the reservation teams. I need you to pick up the phone call, whoever is in charge over there, and smooth this over. Use whatever connections you have left from your waitressing days. Beg them if you have to. Just get this embarrassing bank error resolved before your mother has a full mental breakdown. Still, I remained completely silent. I walked away from the window and traced the edge of a sleek metallic sculpture resting on my bookshelf. My deliberate silence was infuriating him. I could hear his heavy breathing through the phone speaker. He was not used to being ignored. Are you listening to me, Nia? Because if you refuse to help this family out of pure spite, I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your miserable life. I am a senior wealth manager. Do you have any idea the kind of ruthless attorneys I have on retainer? If your stubbornness ruins Chloe's night or embarrasses your mother in front of the state senator tomorrow, I will personally hold you responsible for the financial and social damages. I will sue you for tortious interference. I will drag you into court and take everything you barely own. It was fascinating to listen to him unravel so quickly. He could not just ask for a favor. He was completely incapable of humility. Even when his world was catching fire, he had to demean me in the process. He had to remind me of my supposed place at the bottom of the family hierarchy. You have absolutely no concept of how high-level finance works, Nia. He spat, his words turning venomous. You sit in your cheap little apartment playing with your coding hobby, while the real adults handle the actual economy. People like me build the generational wealth that keeps this country running. We make the decisions. People like you just serve the food and set the tables. You are a dropout. Do not test me on this. As his toxic words echoed off my walls, my mind violently pulled me back 10 years into the past. The memory hit me with a sickening clarity. I remembered standing in my father's mahogany-paneled study. I was 22 years old, clutching a meticulously researched business plan to my chest. I had spent 6 grueling months developing the foundational algorithm for what would eventually become Noir Tech. I needed exactly $10,000 in seed money to purchase a dedicated server rack and secure my first software patent. I pitched my father with everything I had. I showed him the market projections, the gaping security flaws in current banking systems that I was going to fix, and the potential for massive returns. My father sat behind his massive desk, steeped his fingers, and laughed right in my face. He told me that technology was a volatile gamble for dreamers. He looked me dead in the eyes and said that a black woman with no law degree and no corporate discipline had absolutely no business playing in Silicon Valley. He denied my request flat out, telling me to stop begging for handouts and go find a real job. Exactly 1 week later, I walked into that same study to empty the trash can. I saw an open checkbook sitting on my father's desk. The carbon copy revealed a check written for $100,000. The payee was Preston. Preston had strolled into my parents' house wearing a tailored suit and pitched a surefire stock investment portfolio. He had no data. He had no algorithm. He had no actual proof of concept. He just had the unearned confidence of a mediocre white man who spoke loudly about market trends using buzzwords he barely understood. My father trusted him implicitly, handing over 10 times the amount I had asked for without a single second thought. I had to work 3 exhausting jobs just to buy a used overheating server to start my company while Preston gambled with a small fortune. Nia, are you there? Preston's voice snapped me back to the present, cutting through my memories like a jagged knife. I need you to call the estate manager right now. Get on your knees and beg them to run the card again. That is what you are good at, right? Serving the people who actually matter. Just fix it. You have 30 minutes before I dispatch my legal team to ruin you. I stopped pacing. I walked back to the marble coffee table and leaned directly over the phone. Are you finished, Preston? I asked softly. My voice was completely devoid of emotion. It was ice cold, perfectly steady, and terrifyingly calm. He scoffed a sharp, ugly sound of pure disdain. 30 minutes, Nia. Do not make me destroy you. The line went dead. I stood up and stared down at the glowing screen of the phone. Preston had hung up feeling entirely triumphant. He genuinely believed he had just put the rebellious failure of a sister-in-law back in her rightful place. He thought his legal threats had terrified me into submission. He thought his pristine corporate armor was completely impenetrable. But as I walked across the room toward my master server terminal, a dark, triumphant smile broke across my face. Preston did not know that his threats meant absolutely nothing. He was threatening to sue the very woman who owned the ground he was standing on. But more importantly, he did not know that while he was screaming at me over the phone, I had already deployed my proprietary artificial intelligence system. I had unleashed an algorithmic bloodhound to scan every single transaction, every offshore shell company, and every hidden digital ledger connected to the investment fund bearing his name. I turned my back on the glittering city view and walked down the long hallway of my penthouse. The soft thud of my footsteps was quickly swallowed by the low, steady hum of industrial cooling fans. I reached the heavy steel door at the end of the corridor and swiped my thumb across the biometric scanner. The deadbolts clicked open with a heavy metallic thud, revealing my true sanctuary. This was not a typical home office. It was a climate-controlled mini-server room built right into the core of my apartment. The harsh blue and green lights from the server racks washed over my face, illuminating the darkness. I sat down at my primary console, the leather chair creaking slightly in the quiet room, and woke the multiple monitors surrounding me. A secure encrypted transmission pinged on my center screen from the Noir Tech lead investigation team. I had given my top analysts a simple but critical directive just 30 minutes ago. Follow Preston's money. Find out exactly how a mid-tier wealth manager afforded his lavish lifestyle and his constant boasting. The progress bar flashed green and the decrypted financial dossier materialized in front of me. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk, and began to read. As I scrolled through the pages of data, the cold smile on my face vanished entirely, replaced by a hard mask of absolute disgust. Preston was not a financial genius. He was not a Wall Street prodigy. He was not even a competent wealth manager. He was a parasitic fraud. The impressive investment portfolio he had flaunted in my father's study a decade ago, the one that secured his position as the ultimate authority in our family, was entirely fabricated. There were no aggressive tech stocks. There were no secure high-yield bonds. There was no generational wealth-building strategy. My algorithm had mapped his transactions, tracing the digital footprints he thought he had cleverly hidden. Preston had set up a labyrinth of shell companies registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. They had vague corporate-sounding names designed to look like legitimate private equity groups to anyone who did not look too closely. My father had never looked closely. He had simply trusted the confident white man in the tailored suit. Those shell companies were nothing more than digital funnels. For the last 10 years, Preston had been slowly, methodically siphoning money from my parents' retirement accounts. He had drained my sister Chloe's personal trust fund. He had bled them dry right under their noses while sitting at our Sunday dinner table and demanding their respect. But the money did not go to offshore investment accounts. It did not go to real estate. The data trail led straight down into the gutter. Preston had a severe, crippling gambling addiction. Millions of dollars of my family's hard-earned money had bled directly into underground casinos and shady offshore sports betting syndicates. He was a textbook degenerate gambler. He was constantly chasing massive losses, doubling down on terrible bets, and burning through my family's legacy at a terrifying speed. Whenever he lost big, he simply moved more money from my father's accounts into his shell companies to cover his tracks. My family treated him like a financial savior while he was actively driving them toward total bankruptcy. The sheer audacity of his entitlement was staggering. He had the nerve to call my home to threaten me with legal ruin, to mock my business, all while he was drowning in criminal debt. He was a hollow man, wearing an expensive suit, bought with stolen money. But the worst betrayal, the one that made the blood freeze in my veins, was buried at the very bottom of the Noir Tech report. My heart slammed against my ribs as I clicked open a scanned legal document attached to the file. It was a property deed. Specifically, it was the deed to my grandfather's ancestral home. That house was the only piece of genuine, uncorrupted history our family owned. It was a beautiful property in Savannah built with the sweat and tears of a man who actually knew the meaning of hard work. My grandfather had purchased that land during a time when men who looked like him were actively prevented from owning anything. He built it to last, so his grandchildren would always have a foundation. My parents had inherited the property after he passed away, but in their infinite foolishness, they had entrusted the legal paperwork and property management to Preston. Preston had secretly leveraged the ancestral home. He had forged my father's signature on a stack of banking documents and took out a massive, high-interest commercial loan against the property. He used my grandfather's legacy as collateral to pay off a violent syndicate of bookies he owed money to. Of course, a degenerate gambler could never keep up with the exorbitant interest payments on a toxic loan. The document glowing on my screen was a final notice of default. Preston had defaulted months ago. The bank had seized the debt and initiated foreclosure proceedings. My parents were completely oblivious. They thought they owned a paid-off piece of generational wealth. They thought they were the pinnacle of high society. In reality, they were weeks away from losing the only real thing of value they possessed. They were about to be publicly disgraced and left with absolutely nothing. Preston had robbed them blind, and they were too busy looking down on me to notice the thief standing right beside them. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glowing monitor. The bank had declared the loan a toxic asset. They did not want to deal with the messy foreclosure of a historic property, so they bundled it and sold the bad debt to a private commercial collections firm just a few days ago. I looked closely at the name of the purchasing firm listed on the legal filing. A low, sharp laugh escaped my throat, echoing loudly in the cold server room. The bank had indeed sold my family's debt. But guess who owned the anonymous holding company that bought that toxic debt for pennies on the dollar? I did. Through a maze of corporate acquisitions, my holding company had scooped up that exact portfolio of defaulted loans. I did not just own the venue where my mother was hosting her ridiculous gala. I owned the debt that Preston had illegally created. I legally held the deed to my grandfather's house. I owned the very ground they walked on and the roof over their heads. I literally owned Preston's future. And as I closed the encrypted file, I knew exactly what I had to do. I was going to let them put on their expensive clothes. I was going to let them smile for the cameras and pretend they were untouchable. And then I was going to use this information to set the most devastating, perfect trap for tomorrow night. The pale gray light of early dawn was just beginning to bleed through my penthouse windows when my phone vibrated against the desk. I had barely slept. I spent the last few hours reviewing every single line of Preston's fraudulent loan agreements and finalizing the digital locks on the Sterling estate. The caller ID glowed in the dim room. Yvonne Harrison, my mother. I picked up the device and pressed it against my ear, tilting my head slightly. The physical slant of my posture mirrored the twisted, distorted reality of the conversation I was about to have. I did not say a word. I just breathed evenly and waited. "Nia, darling, are you there?" My mother's voice drifted through the speaker. It was not the sharp, commanding tone she had used when she tagged me in that group chat yesterday. It was a fragile, trembling whisper. It was the sound of a woman teetering on the edge of complete social ruin. "Nia, please tell me you are listening. I need you." I remained silent, letting her anxiety marinate in the dead air. "I know you are upset about the gala," she continued, her voice cracking with manufactured tears. "I know how it looked in the chat. But you have to understand my perspective. I was only trying to protect you and little Zara. You know how sensitive she gets with loud noises and crowds. A 500-person event with a live orchestra would have been an absolute sensory nightmare for a child with autism. I was trying to spare you the exhaustion of dealing with a meltdown in public. I worded it poorly in the chat because I was stressed, but I was only thinking of my grandbaby's well-being. The sheer audacity of her gaslighting was physically nauseating. She was actually trying to weaponize my daughter's neurological condition to cover up her own cruel elitism. I closed my eyes tightly, fighting back a sudden wave of dark, suffocating memories. Listening to her twist reality dragged me violently backward into my childhood. I could almost smell the acrid, burning scent of hair grease and scorched hair. I remembered sitting on a hard wooden stool in our kitchen while my mother aggressively yanked a hot comb through my thick, natural curls. She would pull so hard my scalp felt like it was bleeding, all while lecturing me about presentation. She forced me to wear shapeless, high-necked dresses in muted colors. She would look at me through the mirror and casually remark that I had strong, overbearing features. She said I needed to tone myself down so I would not overwhelm people. But I knew the truth even then. It was never about me overwhelming people. It was about making sure I never outshined Chloe. Chloe was the fair, delicate standard of beauty my mother worshipped. Chloe got the vibrant colors, the praise, the delicate hairstyles. I was systematically dimmed, muted, and erased to ensure Chloe's light always burned the brightest. My mother had spent her entire life trying to make me invisible. And now she was begging the invisible daughter for a lifeline. The venue manager is refusing to return my calls. My mother sobbed, shattering my flashback. Nia, the caterers are threatening to walk away. The floral arrangements are sitting in refrigerated trucks in the parking lot. The state senator is attending this event tonight. Do you understand what I am saying? The state senator. If we have to turn him away at the gates because of a stupid bank error, my reputation in Atlanta will be permanently destroyed. We will be a laughingstock. Her breathing grew ragged. Preston says his bank is investigating the glitch, but they cannot clear it until Monday, she pleaded. You used to work with these venue coordinators. You know the back channels. I am begging you, Nia. Call whoever you know at the Sterling estate. Promise them we will pay double on Monday. Use your connections. Save this night for us. I am your mother. You owe me this. I opened my eyes and looked at the digital deed to my grandfather's house, still glowing on my center monitor. My mother was completely oblivious to the fact that her precious son-in-law had mortgaged her heritage to pay off gambling debts. She was oblivious to the fact that I now owned that debt. She was oblivious to the fact that she was currently begging the actual legal owner of the Sterling estate to let her inside. I took a slow, calculated breath and let my voice soften into a mask of perfect, compliant submission. I understand, Mom. I replied, my tone completely devoid of the rage boiling in my veins. I know how important the state senator is to your philanthropic image. I know how hard you worked on this. Oh, thank God, she exhaled a wet, shuddering breath of profound relief. I knew you would not let family down, Nia. I knew you would step up. Can you fix it? Can you get us in? I pulled my keyboard closer and tapped the key that reactivated her reservation in the venue database. I did not process Preston's payment. I simply overrode the system using my administrator credentials, marking the event as paid in full by the owner. It is done, I said smoothly. I called in a massive favor. The manager owed me from a cybersecurity contract I did for them last year. They cleared the block. The gates will be open. The caterers are setting up right now. You can tell Preston to stop worrying about his bank glitch. You are an angel, Nia. My mother cried, her voice instantly shifting from desperate panic back to her usual arrogant confidence. I will make sure the senator knows you helped with the logistics. We are heading to the venue at 6 tonight for the red carpet arrivals. Wear your best dress, Mom. I told her, my eyes locked on the surveillance feeds from the venue that I had just brought up on my secondary monitor. It is going to be a night nobody in Atlanta will ever forget. I hung up the phone and tossed it onto the desk. My mother believed she had won. She believed she had successfully manipulated the ugly duckling daughter into serving the family once again. She was going to put on her diamonds link arms with her fraudulent son-in-law and walk into that venue feeling like absolute royalty. She had no idea that I had just rolled out the red carpet leading directly into a slaughterhouse. The late afternoon sun bleeds through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our master suite, casting long golden shadows across the hardwood. The quiet luxury of the room is a stark contrast to the digital warfare I just waged. If a camera were to capture this exact moment, it would execute a slow, deliberate pan across the space, starting from the sprawling city skyline outside, moving past the pristine, modern furnishings, and finally resting on my reflection in the full-length mirror. I am adjusting the delicate drape of my emerald green evening gown. It is a dress that commands attention without screaming for it. It is flawless, sleek, and undeniably powerful. it is armor. I traced the neckline of the silk fabric, thinking back to the final seconds of that pathetic phone call with my mother. I did not just wave my hand and give her back the venue out of the goodness of my heart. I extracted a price. When she was sobbing and thanking me for fixing the system, I stopped her and laid down my absolute condition. I told her that my magic fix came with a mandatory guest list update. Nia, Malik, and our daughter Zara were to be added as VIP guests. We required a front and center table. I could practically hear my mother grinding her expensive veneers over the phone line. She had immediately tried to backtrack, reverting to her fake concern. She claimed the noise would be too much for Zara, that she just wanted to protect her grandbaby from a sensory overload. I shut her down instantly. I informed her that Zara had custom noise-canceling headphones and that I had already secured a private quiet suite at the venue for her to retreat to if she needed a break. I made it crystal clear that if my family was not on that list, the digital gates of the Sterling estate would remain permanently locked. She capitulated with a choked gasp of bitter defeat. The heavy oak door to the master suite clicks open, pulling me from my thoughts. The imaginary camera tracks the movement, catching my husband as he steps into the room. Malik is a vision of quiet, grounding strength. He walks toward me, adjusting the cuffs of a midnight blue tuxedo that fits his broad shoulders perfectly. When my family was busy mocking him at Sunday dinners, asking him when he was going to graduate from flipping burgers to a real career, he never raised his voice. He never took the bait. He just smiled politely, wrapped his arm around my waist, and went back to work. He stops right behind me, his dark eyes meeting mine in the mirror. He rests his warm hands on my bare shoulders, and I lean back against his chest, drawing from his steady energy. "Did she buy it?" he asks, his voice a deep, calming rumble. "Hook, line, and sinker," I reply, watching our reflection. She thinks I called in a favor with the venue management to clear a bank error. She thinks she manipulated the desperate outcast daughter into saving her precious social reputation. Malik lets out a low, rich chuckle. He turns me around to face him, his hands moving down to rest on my waist. She has absolutely no idea what she is walking into tonight. None, I confirm. I look up at him, taking in the sharp line of his jaw and the intelligent warmth in his eyes. "Are you ready for this?" You know how Preston gets when he is cornered. He is going to be incredibly arrogant tonight to overcompensate for the panic attack he just had. Malik steps back to adjust his bow tie in the mirror. A rare mischievous spark glints in his eyes. Let him be arrogant, Nia. In fact, I hope he is at his absolute worst tonight. I hope he stands on a table and brags about his wealth to the entire room. I tilt my head, studying his face. "You have that look, Malik. What did you do?" He turns back to me, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his handsome face. He reaches into his jacket pocket and pulls out a pair of silver cufflinks, meticulously fastening them to his wrists. "You know how your mother loves to boast about securing El Etoile for the catering, right? The most exclusive culinary firm in Atlanta. A 2-year waiting list just to get a tasting menu." I nod, recalling how my mother had practically shoved the catering contract in my face months ago. She had made a point to mention that El Etoile was the kind of sophisticated establishment that Malik could only ever dream of working for. She called it refined dining, a stark contrast to my husband's so-called street food logistics. Malik finishes his cuffs and looks at me. "Well, El Etoile is incredible. Their supply chain is flawless, and their client list is a goldmine. Which is exactly why my holding company initiated a hostile buyout of their parent corporation 3 weeks ago." I stare at him, my eyes widening as the magnitude of his words washes over me. He steps closer, lowering his voice to a smooth, triumphant murmur. "The ink dried on the final acquisition papers yesterday morning, Nia. My corporate umbrella now fully owns El Etoile. The executive chef, the entire serving staff, the sommeliers pouring the vintage champagne, and the managers running the floor tonight are all officially on my payroll." A startled laugh escapes my lips. I reach out and grab the lapels of his tuxedo, pulling him slightly closer. "You bought the catering company working my mother's gala." "I bought the best catering company in the state," he corrects me. his eyes fiercely proud. Your mother just happens to be one of my newest clients. She is paying a premium markup for the privilege, too. The sheer poetic justice of it all settles over the room like a heavy, intoxicating perfume. For 10 years, they had ridiculed us. They called me a chaotic failure for dropping out of law school and building my own systems from scratch. They called Malik a glorified hired cook who would never amount to anything more than a neighborhood caterer. They measured our worth against their country club memberships and their leased luxury cars. They thought they owned the world because they knew how to play by its oldest, most restrictive rules. We stand side by side in front of the glass. Two outcasts. Two failures. We did not just break their rules. We bought the board game. I look at our reflection one last time. We are powerful, untouchable, and completely unified. I think about my beautiful, brilliant daughter Zara, safely preparing for the night in her custom dress. She will not be hidden away like an embarrassing secret. She will be front and center, surrounded by parents who actually know how to protect her. Let us go, I say, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. Let us go to the party. Malik offers me his arm. Tonight, my family is going to put on their stolen diamonds and walk into a venue they do not own. They are going to drink expensive wine and eat a meticulously crafted 5-course meal, and they will do it all while being served by the hired cook on the exact piece of land legally owned by the failed daughter. The drive to the Sterling estate took less than 40 minutes, but as our sleek black car pulled through the massive wrought iron gates, it felt like crossing into an entirely different universe. The sweeping circular driveway was already jammed with a parade of luxury vehicles. Valets in crisp white jackets rushed to open doors for politicians, socialites, and corporate titans. I watched the scene unfold through the tinted passenger window, holding Malik by the hand. Zara sat quietly in the back seat, her custom emerald dress perfectly matching mine. She was calmly tapping a rhythm on her knee, her sleek noise-canceling headphones resting comfortably over her ears. She was perfectly regulated, perfectly safe, and completely unbothered by the chaos outside. If a camera were tracking us tonight, it would follow closely behind as we stepped out of the vehicle and walked onto the red carpet. It would capture the exact moment the flashing bulbs of the local press bounced off the subtle diamond accents in my dress. We moved as a single, unbreakable unit. Malik walked tall and relaxed, holding Zara's hand while I walked on his other side. The heavy mahogany doors of the grand hall swung open, revealing a breathtaking spectacle. The Sterling estate was a masterpiece of architectural preservation, and tonight it was dressed to the nines. Massive crystal chandeliers threw fractured rainbows across the vaulted ceilings. Thousands of white orchids cascaded from towering golden vases on every table. The string quartet played softly in the corner, providing a sophisticated backdrop to the low hum of wealthy Atlanta mingling. It was a flawless execution of high society elegance, and it was all mine. I barely had a moment to take in the sheer irony of the room before my mother materialized from the crowd. Yvonne was wearing a heavily beaded silver gown that looked suffocatingly tight. She wore a wide, brilliant smile designed entirely for the photographers hovering near the entrance, but her eyes were cold and frantic. She glided toward us, her gaze immediately darting to Zara's headphones. I saw the micro-expression of deep embarrassment flash across her face before she locked it down behind her matriarchal mask. "Nia, you actually made it," she said, leaning in to air-kiss my cheek. She did not look at Malik. She never looked at Malik. "I am so glad you could be here to support the family. Come, I have your table ready." She turned on her heel and expected us to follow. We did. We followed her past the front row tables where the state senator and his wife were currently sipping champagne. We walked past the secondary tier where the local business owners and prominent attorneys were seated. We kept walking. We walked until the lush floral arrangements grew smaller and the lighting grew noticeably dimmer. We walked until the soft classical music was drowned out by the harsh metallic clatter of silverware. My mother finally stopped at a small cramped table shoved tightly into the far back corner of the grand hall. It was positioned directly next to the heavy swinging wooden doors of the kitchen exit, A constant draft of cold air blew past the chairs every time a waiter rushed in or out. The smell of the expensive perfume from the main floor was entirely replaced by the sharp scent of industrial dish soap and roasted meat. It was the worst seat in the entire building. It was a table designed for people you were forced to invite but desperately wanted to hide. "I know it is a little out of the way," my mother said, her voice dripping with toxic fake sympathy. "But I specifically requested this spot for you, Nia. I was thinking about little Zara. I know how unpredictable she can be. Being back here right next to the exit means you can slip out quietly if she has one of her episodes. It is just more practical for everyone. We would not want a sudden meltdown to ruin the senator's speech." She patted my arm, a condescending gesture meant to put me in my place. I did not flinch. I did not argue. I simply looked at the swinging kitchen door and gave her a serene, untouchable smile. "It is incredibly thoughtful of you, Mom," I replied, my tone perfectly measured. "We are very comfortable right here. You should get back to your guests." She looked momentarily thrown by my lack of resistance, but she quickly recovered, smoothing down her silver dress. "Enjoy the food," she said over her shoulder as she walked away. Preston insisted on the absolute best. Malik pulled out a chair for Zara, making sure she was settled before holding mine. As I sat down, I saw Malik share a brief, almost imperceptible nod with the head waiter rushing out of the kitchen. The man paused, offered a deep, respectful bow to Malik, and hurried back to his duties. My mother had put us next to the kitchen without realizing she had placed Malik directly next to his own kingdom. Before we could even look at the menus, a cloying, sickeningly sweet perfume announced the arrival of my sister. Chloe glided over to our terrible table wearing a blush pink chiffon dress that cost more than most people's annual mortgage. She held a crystal flute of champagne, her perfectly manicured fingers glittering with diamonds bought by stolen money. "Nia," she cooed, resting a hand on the back of my chair. "You look so nice. And look at Zara. Those headphones are so brave. It is so wonderful that you do not mind bringing her out in public like this." She took a slow sip of her champagne, her eyes drifting over to Malik. He was currently cutting a small piece of bread for Zara, his movements calm and precise. Chloe let out a soft, pitying sigh. "Malik, it is so good to see you, Chloe," said her voice pitched just loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "Mom told me you are still doing your little food truck events. It must be so overwhelming for you to be in a place like this. The Sterling estate is very exclusive. Just try to relax, okay? And please be careful with the food tonight. L'Etoile prepared the menu and it is incredibly rich. We would hate for you to drop any of that heavy sauce on these antique carpets. The cleaning fees are outrageous, and Preston is already footing such a massive bill for tonight." The sheer unadulterated disrespect hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Chloe smiled down at us, a golden princess bestowing her unwanted charity upon the peasants. She expected anger. She expected me to shrink. Instead, Malik slowly wiped his hands on his linen napkin and looked up at my sister. His expression was a masterclass in lethal composure. He did not look insulted, he looked genuinely amused. "Do not worry about the carpets," Chloe Malik said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that commanded instant attention. "I am very familiar with the cleaning protocols here. And you are right about the menu. The braised short rib is particularly delicate this evening. The executive chef spent 12 hours reducing the glaze. I will make sure we do not waste a single drop." Chloe blinked, her manufactured smile faltering for a fraction of a second. She lacked the intellectual capacity to understand that Malik had just casually recited the proprietary cooking methods of the most exclusive catering firm in the city. She simply assumed he had read the menu card. "Well, just try to enjoy yourselves," she said, recovering her haughty posture. "I have to go back to the VIP section. Preston is about to make his big announcement." She spun around and walked away, her blush dress trailing behind her like a fragile illusion. I watched her weave through the crowd, completely blind to the reality of her own existence. She thought she was untouchable. She thought her husband was a king. A sudden sharp tapping sound echoed through the grand hall, cutting through the chatter. The massive crystal chandeliers dimmed, bathing the room in a soft, dramatic glow. A single bright spotlight snapped on, illuminating the grand stage at the front of the room. The crowd fell silent, turning their attention forward. Preston walked into the light. He wore a custom-tailored black tuxedo, his hair perfectly styled, his posture radiating the smug, unearned confidence of a man who believed he had outsmarted the entire world. He walked up to the microphone stand, adjusting it with a practiced, arrogant smile. He tapped the microphone twice. "Ladies and gentlemen," Preston began, his voice echoing smoothly across the room. "Thank you all for being here tonight." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, my eyes locked on the man who had secretly drained my family dry. I watched him prepare to speak, knowing exactly what he was about to do. Preston was about to stand on a stage built on my property, fed by my husband's company, and perform the biggest, most desperate scam of his entire pathetic life right in front of me. The spotlight hit Preston, casting a sharp shadow behind him. From my vantage point at the back of the room, the angle of the light made him look towering, almost godlike, to the people sitting in the front rows. He gripped the edges of the wooden podium, his manicured fingers catching the light. He projected the perfect image of a successful visionary. He was a predator wearing a tailored suit. "Thank you," he breathed into the microphone, his voice dropping an octave to convey a false sense of intimacy. "Look around this room. Look at the power, the brilliance, the sheer excellence gathered here tonight. We are the architects of our own future. We are the black elite of Atlanta, and we know better than anyone that true power is not given. It is built. It is built together. Built." He paused, letting the applause roll over him. He closed his eyes, soaking it in like a man starved for worship. I watched his chest expand. I watched the way he played the crowd, striking every single emotional chord with surgical precision. He was selling them a dream wrapped in the golden packaging of my family's reputation. "Tonight is not just a celebration of my mother-in-law's incredible philanthropic work," he continued, gesturing gracefully toward Yvonne. The spotlight shifted slightly, catching the glittering tears of absolute pride welling in her eyes. My father sat beside her, his chest puffed out, nodding in solemn agreement. They looked at Preston as if he were their actual flesh and blood, the son they always dreamed of having. They were completely blinded by the illusion. They were applauding the very man who was actively destroying everything they had built. "Tonight is about legacy," Preston declared, leaning back into the microphone. "It is about generational wealth. My wife Chloe and I have been blessed. The Harrison family built a foundation of excellence, and they entrusted me with protecting it. We took properties like the historic ancestral home in Savannah and leveraged them strategically. We grew our portfolio. But true wealth is meaningless if you do not share the blueprint with your brothers and sisters." I felt Malik shift beside me, his shoulder brushing against mine. The mention of my grandfather's house, the very house Preston had secretly mortgaged to underground bookies to cover his gambling debts, was vile. He was using the blood, sweat, and legacy of a hard-working man he never met to build a foundation of false trust with the innocent people in this room. My grandfather had fought tooth and nail for that land, and Preston was using it as a prop in his dirty theater. That is why Preston said, his voice rising with manufactured passion, "I am officially launching the Harrison Vanguard Fund, a community development initiative designed exclusively for the people in this room. We are acquiring commercial real estate across the Southeast, creating incubators for minority-owned businesses. But to secure the prime properties, we need to move immediately. The big banks want to shut us out. They want to gatekeep the commercial zones. We cannot let them." A low murmur of agreement rippled through the grand hall. Preston was weaponizing their shared experiences, their real struggles against institutional barriers, and using it to blind them to the reality of his greed. He was manipulating their desire to uplift the community, turning their good intentions into a weapon against them. "I am opening the fund tonight," he announced, his voice reaching a crescendo. "I am looking for a select group of visionary partners to provide an initial seed investment of $5 million. In return, you receive guaranteed equity in the Vanguard portfolio backed by the full weight and collateral of the Harrison family assets. He spread his arms wide, looking out over the sea of wealthy entrepreneurs, doctors, and real estate moguls. We build the future tonight, together. The room erupted into thunderous applause. The string quartet immediately transitioned into an uplifting, triumphant piece of music. The house lights flared back to full brightness. Waiters in pristine uniforms rushed out of the kitchen doors beside me, carrying trays of vintage champagne to toast the new venture. I did not look at the waiters. I kept my eyes locked on the front rows. I watched as highly respected businessmen, men and women who had spent decades building their fortunes through honest, grueling work, began pulling sleek leather checkbooks from their jackets. I saw a prominent tech developer waving over his assistant, urgently whispering instructions to wire funds. I saw a retired surgeon nodding eagerly to her husband, completely sold on the dream of community empowerment. Preston was not just stealing from my family anymore. He was about to steal from good, innocent people. He was using my parents' pristine social reputation as a glittering shield to rob their friends and colleagues blind. The $5 million would never go to a development fund. It would go directly into his offshore accounts and shell companies. It would be wired to the violent gambling syndicates he owed his life to. And when the dust settled and the money vanished, my parents would be left holding the bag. The Harrison name would be synonymous with the greatest financial fraud in Atlanta history. My mother and father would face total social exile, total bankruptcy, and likely federal prison. And they were sitting there clapping for the man pulling the trigger. I glanced down at my watch. The digital numbers glowed stark and cold against my wrist. I had exactly 2 minutes. 2 minutes before the first check was physically handed to Preston. 2 minutes before the first wire transfer cleared the bank. 2 minutes before this room full of successful people became legally entangled in an absolute nightmare. I turned my head and looked at Malik. He was already looking at me, his dark eyes sharp and focused. The amusement from earlier had vanished entirely, replaced by the cold, calculating precision of a man who understood exactly what needed to happen next. He reached out and gently rested his hand over Zara's noise-canceling headphones, ensuring they were secure and that she was completely insulated from the upcoming chaos. "It is time," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble beneath the swell of the string quartet and the cheering crowd. I nodded. I stood up from the cramped hidden table by the kitchen doors. I smoothed down the heavy silk of my emerald gown. I did not feel the sting of my mother's rejection anymore. I did not feel the weight of my sister's condescension. I only felt the cold, hard steel of absolute purpose. I owned the ground Preston was standing on. I owned the food his guests were eating. I owned the debt that was suffocating him. And I was about to own his entire reality. I stepped out from the shadows of the back corner and began walking down the center aisle of the grand hall, moving directly toward the brightly lit stage. I moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a woman who had absolutely nothing left to lose and everything to destroy. The heavy silk of my emerald gown swept across the antique carpets, producing a soft, rhythmic whisper that seemed to cut right through the ambient noise of the grand hall. A camera tracking backward in front of me would have captured my face perfectly. It was a mask of icy resolve cutting through the sea of perfectly tailored suits and glittering gowns. The crowd parted naturally as I walked. They did not know who I was, but they recognized the gravity of my stride. I was not the invisible daughter anymore. I was the executioner. As I passed a high-top table near the center aisle, I smoothly picked up a crystal champagne flute and a heavy silver spoon. I did not break my stride. I simply raised the glass and struck the side of it with the silver metal. A sharp, clear chime rang out. I struck it again and again. The bright ringing sound pierced the air, slicing right through the triumphant swell of the string quartet. The musicians faltered, lowering their bows in sudden confusion. The low hum of wealthy Atlanta mingling instantly died. 500 faces turned toward the center aisle, 500 pairs of eyes locked onto me. On the stage, Preston's perfectly crafted smile froze, His manicured hands gripped the wooden edges of the podium so tightly his knuckles turned white. In the front row, my mother physically recoiled. Yvonne stood up from her seat, her heavy silver-beaded gown catching the stage lights. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of absolute horror and furious indignation. She thought the ugly duckling had finally snapped. She thought the chaotic failure of a daughter was about to throw a public tantrum and ruin her flawless philanthropic reputation. "Nia, what on earth are you doing?" My mother hissed, her voice a sharp, frantic whisper that carried perfectly in the dead silent room. "Sit down immediately. You are making a scene." I ignored her, keeping my eyes fixed dead ahead on Preston. When I did not stop, my mother panicked. She turned frantically toward the perimeter of the room, where the venue security team stood at attention. They were broad, imposing men in dark suits, equipped with earpieces. "Remove her," my mother snapped, waving a frantic hand in my direction. "Escort her out of the building right now. She is having an episode." A ripple of uncomfortable murmurs moved through the elite crowd. They waited for the guards to descend upon me to drag the disruptive woman out of the glamorous event. But the room remained perfectly still. Not a single security guard moved a muscle. They stood planted at their posts, their hands resting casually in front of them, their eyes staring straight ahead. My mother snapped her fingers again, her face flushing a deep angry red. I said, "Remove her. Do your jobs." What my mother failed to understand was that they were doing their jobs. Those men did not work for the event planners. They did not work for the catering company. They were elite, private security contracted exclusively by the Sterling estate. They answered directly to the legal owner of the property. And the legal owner of the property was currently walking up the short carpeted steps to the main stage. I stepped into the bright glare of the spotlight. The heat of the stage lamps washed over my face. Preston let go of the podium and took a half step back. The arrogant swagger he had paraded just moments ago was rapidly dissolving into deep, uncomfortable confusion. He looked down at me, trying to reassert his dominance, trying to play the role of the benevolent, tolerant brother-in-law. "Nia," he whispered, his voice low and strained so the microphone would not pick it up. "What is this? Are you drunk? Get off the stage before you embarrass Chloe and your parents." I did not respond to his bait. I did not blink. I simply stepped directly into his personal space, invading the invisible bubble of power he had drawn around himself. I reached out and wrapped my hand firmly around the stem of the microphone. For a split second, Preston resisted, his fingers tightening against the metal. But he looked into my eyes, and whatever he saw there made his breath hitch. He let go. I pulled the microphone from the stand, the cord trailing behind it. I turned to face the audience, looking out over the sea of shocked, confused faces. I saw my father looking bewildered. I saw Chloe clutching her champagne glass, her mouth hanging open. I saw my mother sinking back into her chair, a portrait of total social defeat. I brought the microphone to my lips. My voice echoed across the grand hall, steady, resonant, and utterly uncompromising. "Preston speaks beautifully about investments," I said, letting the words hang in the heavy silence. "He paints a masterful picture of community and generational wealth. But he forgot to mention one crucial detail about his portfolio. He forgot to mention exactly how he stole the assets of this very family." The blood drains from Preston's face so fast, it leaves him looking like a wax figure. Standing mere inches from him, I watch the exact moment his manufactured reality shatters. The artificial confidence evaporates, leaving behind a terrified small man. His jaw slacks, and his eyes dart wildly around the room, searching for an exit, a friendly face, an excuse. He finds nothing. Down in the front row, Chloe's delicate features contort into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She drops her crystal champagne flute. The glass hits the marble floor, shattering with a sharp crack that echoes in the dead silent room, but nobody looks at her. They are all looking at me. I do not break eye contact with Preston. I simply raise my free hand and offer a single deliberate wink toward the glass-enclosed audiovisual booth at the back of the mezzanine. Marcus, my lead technician, does not miss a beat. The massive LED screen dominating the stage behind us flickers. The sleek golden logo of the Harrison Vanguard Fund vanishes instantly, replaced by a stark, high-resolution scan of a legal document. It is 30 feet tall, impossible to ignore, and crystal clear. It is the master deed and title of ownership for the property we are standing on. I point to the screen behind me. Let us look at the facts, I say, my voice ringing with cold authority. Look at the top line. Owner of record. The text is highlighted in bright yellow. Nia Holdings, LLC. The collective gasp from the audience is a physical force. It sweeps through the grand hall, rattling the orchids and vibrating against the crystal glasses. 500 of Atlanta's most influential figures stare at the screen, processing the undeniable legal proof of my ownership. Whispers erupt like a sudden storm. Down in the front row, my mother stands up so fast her chair tips backward and crashes to the floor. She does not notice. Her heavy silver dress catches the stage lights, but she has lost every ounce of her regal matriarchal bearing. She points a trembling finger at the screen, her mouth opening and closing rapidly, but she cannot form a single coherent word. Her eyes dart from the towering deed to me standing calmly in the spotlight. The reality of the situation is breaking her brain. The daughter she shoved into a dark corner by the kitchen doors is the master of the house. I look directly down at her. "Welcome to my estate," I say, my voice slicing through the rising murmurs of the crowd. My mother was right earlier this evening. Our family is very successful. Except the person paying for this entire extravagant party is not her. And it certainly is not Preston. It is me. Preston finally snaps out of his paralysis. He lunges forward, reaching for the microphone in my hand. "Turn that off!" he shouts, his voice cracking with panic. "Tech, cut the feed right now. Security, get her off the stage." He waves frantically at the guards standing at the perimeter. Not a single one of them moves. The head of security, a massive man named David, simply crosses his arms and stares Preston down. "They are on my payroll. They have been briefed on exactly how tonight will proceed." Preston is utterly powerless. I take a step back, holding the microphone firmly out of his reach. "Do not touch me, Preston," I say, my tone dropping to a dangerous warning level. "You are a guest in my home, and right now you are severely overstaying your welcome." He freezes his hands, suspended mid-air. He looks at the guards, then at the crowd, and finally at the giant deed projected behind him. He is trapped. I turn my attention back to the audience. The wealthy investors who just moments ago were pulling out their checkbooks are now sitting perfectly still. Pens are being capped. Checkbooks are being shoved back into breast pockets. The illusion is dead. "You see, Preston needed a venue to sell you this incredible lie." I continue, pacing slowly across the stage, owning every square inch of it. He needed a place that screamed generational wealth and untouchable elite status. He came to the property management firm representing the Sterling estate and begged for a reservation. He leveraged my father's name to bypass the 3-year wait list. What he did not know, because he never bothers to look past the surface of anyone he deems beneath him, is that I purchased this estate 3 years ago. I approved his reservation. I discounted the rental fee so he could afford to host you all tonight. I gave him the rope he is currently hanging himself with. I pause, letting the humiliation soak into his bones. I look down at Chloe. She is sinking into her chair, her hands covering her face, trying to hide from the burning stares of her social circle. "And Chloe," I say, addressing her directly, "you were so concerned about Malik dropping food on these antique carpets. You raved about the executive chef at El Etoile. You bragged about how exclusive and expensive the catering was tonight." Chloe looks up, her tear-streaked face pale and terrified. El Etoile is not a French culinary conglomerate, I state plainly, educating the entire room. It is the corporate parent company of Malik's food truck empire. My husband designed the menu you just ate. He paid the staff serving your drinks. He owns the plates on your table. You told him to be careful with the food tonight, completely unaware that he is the culinary genius who created it. You thought we were charities. We are your landlords and your caterers. A ripple of low, mocking laughter moves through the back of the room. The local business owners, the people who actually built their wealth through hard work, are realizing exactly what kind of fools Preston and Chloe are. The elite politicians in the front rows simply look disgusted. Nobody likes being taken for a ride, and Preston had just tried to take the most powerful people in the state for a $5 million joyride. "This is a misunderstanding," Preston stammers, backing away from me. His tuxedo suddenly looks too big for him. He is sweating profusely, the beads of moisture catching the stage lights. Nia is confused. She has always been jealous of Chloe. This is a family dispute bleeding into business. You have to believe me. I do not have to be jealous of a woman living in a house facing foreclosure. Preston, I reply, shooting down his pathetic defense instantly. I do not have to be jealous of a man who drives a leased Mercedes while dodging calls from aggressive creditors. I gesture to the AV booth again. Let us talk about those investments you mentioned, Preston. Let us talk about the Harrison Vanguard Fund. Let us show your potential partners exactly what you do with other people's money. The giant screen flickers again. The deed to the Sterling estate is replaced by a massive, highly detailed financial spreadsheet. It is a terrifying web of red numbers, overdue notices, and default warnings. I hired the best forensic accountants in the country to tear through his life, and they left nothing hidden. Right there on the screen in 30-point font are the records of Preston's offshore accounts. The records of his massive, crippling gambling debts. The records of the shell companies he set up to funnel money away from his legitimate business ventures. But the most damning piece of evidence, the one that makes my father gasp out loud and clutch his chest, is the center document. This, I say, pointing to the screen, is the second mortgage Preston secretly took out on the Harrison ancestral home in Savannah. He forged my father's signature to secure a $2 million loan from a private, unregulated lender to cover his losses at the tables in Macau. He used the legacy he just spent 20 minutes praising as collateral for his own filthy habits. My father stands up, his face a portrait of absolute devastation. He looks at Preston, the son he always wanted, and sees a monster. "Preston, you swore to me," my father whispers, his voice carrying a heartbreaking weight. "You swore those documents were just routine tax transfers." "He lied to you, Dad," I say, my voice softening for a fraction of a second before returning to cold steel. "He lied to you. He lied to Mom. He lied to Chloe. And tonight, he was going to lie to every single person in this room. He was not raising $5 million for a community development fund. He was raising $5 million to pay back the men who are threatening to break his legs." Preston shakes his head wildly. His hands are trembling. He looks at the crowd, but there is no sympathy left. The tech developer in the second row is already on his phone, furiously canceling the wire transfer he had authorized minutes ago. The retired surgeon is glaring at Preston with absolute revulsion. The state senator is motioning for his security detail, preparing to leave the building immediately to distance himself from the toxic fallout. "It is fake," Preston shouts, pointing a shaking finger at the screen. "She fabricated these documents. She is trying to ruin me." "The bank routing numbers are right there on the screen, Preston," I say calmly. "The notary stamps are visible. The IP addresses for the offshore transfers are documented. Any lawyer in this room, and there are dozens of them, can verify these records with a single phone call tomorrow morning. You are done." He stares at me, his chest heaving. He realizes he has no moves left. There is no charm, no smile, no tailored suit that can save him from the absolute concrete reality of his crimes. He is ruined. I step closer to him, lowering my voice so only he and the front row can hear the final verdict. "You thought you could step on me because I chose a quiet life. You thought you could mock my husband because he works with his hands. You thought you could use my daughter as a punchline. You mistook my silence for weakness. I am not weak, Preston. I was just waiting for the perfect moment to crush you." I turn my back on him, dismissing his entire existence. I look out at the stunned, silent crowd. "Please enjoy the rest of the evening," I say, projecting my voice across the grand hall. "The champagne is fully paid for, the desserts are exquisite, And if anyone requires a consultation for legitimate commercial real estate investments, Nia Holdings LLC will be accepting new clients on Monday morning. I drop the microphone. It hits the wooden stage with a heavy, resounding thud. I do not look back as I walk down the stairs. I walk straight toward the back of the room where Malik is standing tall and proud, holding Zara's hand. I am no longer the black sheep of the family. I am the only one left standing. The silence in the grand hall was absolute, a heavy, suffocating vacuum that seemed to suck the oxygen straight out of the room. If a camera were sweeping across the space in a wide parallax arc, right at this very second, it would capture a flawless portrait of inverted power. It would frame me standing tall and bathed in the harsh stage spotlight looking down from the podium. In the background, the massive digital screen glowed with my absolute authority. Down below in the foreground, my family sat frozen in their front row seats, utterly diminished, rapidly shrinking under the weight of their own impending ruin. They were looking up at me, the daughter they had discarded, as if I were a stranger, holding a loaded weapon. I did not let the silence stretch for too long. I raised my hand, giving Marcus another crisp, deliberate signal. The screen behind me shifted with a sharp digital snap. The deed to the Sterling estate vanished. In its place, 2 new documents materialized side by side, towering 30 feet high for every single member of the Atlanta elite to read. They were not elegant corporate deeds. They were stark, harsh legal warnings printed in bold, aggressive lettering. Notice of default and intent to foreclose. The document on the left clearly listed the sprawling Buckhead estate my parents had lived in for the past 2 decades. The document on the right listed the modern glass and steel mansion Chloe and Preston had built just 3 years ago. The exact loan amounts were highlighted in neon yellow. The numbers were staggering, astronomical figures that represented total financial annihilation. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom, again louder this time. The prominent business owners and socialites sitting at the front tables physically recoiled, shifting away from my parents as if their sudden poverty was a contagious disease. Preston has an expensive hobby, I announced into the microphone, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. A very dangerous, very destructive hobby. He does not just play the stock market. He plays high-stakes underground baccarat in Macau and private poker games right here in the city. And he is notoriously terrible at it. I looked down at Chloe. She was staring at the screen, her mouth moving soundlessly. Her perfectly manicured hands gripped the edge of the tablecloth so tightly her knuckles were stark white. The color had completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost trapped inside a couture gown. Over the past 4 years, Preston systematically drained his own accounts. I continued pacing slowly across the stage, ensuring my voice reached every corner of the hall. When his money ran out, he started leveraging his assets. When those ran out, he realized he had married into a family that possessed blind, unconditional trust. He convinced my father to grant him limited power of attorney over the Harrison family trust, under the guise of streamlining their corporate tax liabilities. He brought my parents stacks of highly complex legal documents filled with obscure financial jargon and told them where to sign. And they signed. They signed everything he put in front of them because he was the golden son they always wanted. My father let out a low, agonizing groan. He slumped forward, resting his head in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking. My mother sat entirely paralyzed. Her eyes were locked on the foreclosure notice bearing her home address, the house where she hosted her charity galas, the house she used as a weapon to measure everyone else's worth. It was gone. He used those signatures to take out massive high-interest loans against your primary residence. Mom, I said, addressing her directly. My tone was devoid of malice. It was purely clinical, delivering the fatal diagnosis. He leveraged the Buckhead estate to the absolute maximum legal limit. And Chloe, I shifted my gaze to my sister. He did not spare you either. He forged your signature on a second mortgage for your dream home. Every designer bag you bought, every luxury vacation you posted online was funded by stolen money and fraudulent credit. Your entire life is a house of cards, and a gust of wind just knocked it down. Chloe turned slowly toward Preston. Her eyes were wide, welling with tears of sheer panic. Preston, she whispered, her voice trembling. Preston, tell me she is lying. Tell me it is a lie. Preston could not look at her. He was staring at the floor, his chest heaving, his perfectly styled hair now slightly disheveled. He was sweating profusely, a man watching the walls of his reality close in and crush him. The private lenders and the banks eventually came calling. I told the crowd holding their absolute rapt attention. You can only miss so many payments before the institutional patience runs out. 90 days ago, both of those properties officially went into default. The banks prepared to seize the assets. They prepared to throw my parents and my sister out onto the street and liquidate the real estate to recoup their massive losses. I paused, letting the devastating reality of the situation settle over the room. I looked at the state senator, who was currently whispering frantically to his aide, clearly instructing him to sever all ties with the Harrison family effective immediately. The social exile had already begun. But major banks despise holding bad debt, I said, my voice dropping to a smooth conversational volume that commanded absolute silence. They hate the messy optics of foreclosures and public auctions. They prefer to bundle those toxic notes and sell them off to private holding companies for pennies on the dollar to clear their ledgers. It is a standard industry practice. I gripped the microphone stand, my eyes locking onto Preston's terrified face. So the bank sold the bad debt, I declared, the words ringing out like a final death knell. They packaged the loans for the Buckhead estate and your mansion, Preston, and they sold them to the highest private bidder. And the shell company that bought that debt, the private entity that now legally holds the paper on every single thing you own, is mine. The entire grand hall erupted into a frenzy of shocked whispers. Welcome to the real world, Chloe, I said, staring directly into my sister's horrified eyes. You always mocked Malik and me for living simply. You told us we did not understand wealth. But you are about to understand poverty. I own your house. I own our parents' house. I am your bank now. And I am officially calling in the debt. A primal guttural roar suddenly tore from Preston's throat. The sheer humiliation, the total destruction of his ego and his freedom finally snapped the last remaining thread of his sanity. He lunged forward, scrambling up the carpeted steps of the stage like a rabid animal. His face was twisted into a mask of pure violent rage. You bitch, he screamed, spit flying from his lips as he charged toward me. His hands reaching out to grab the microphone, to grab me, to do anything to stop the broadcast of his ruin. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood perfectly still. Before Preston could close the 10-foot gap between us, a massive shadow stepped into the light. David, the head of my private security detail, moved with terrifying speed and brutal efficiency. He intercepted Preston mid-stride. David's broad shoulders slammed directly into Preston's chest, stopping his momentum instantly. With a swift, practiced motion, David hooked his arm around Preston's neck, swept his leg, and drove the smaller man face first into the hard wooden floor of the stage. The impact was loud and violent. Preston gasped, his breath knocked completely out of his lungs as David pinned his arms behind his back, driving a heavy knee squarely between his shoulder blades. 2 more security guards rushed the stage, immediately flanking David and securing Preston's struggling legs. Get off me! Preston gagged, his face pressed painfully against the floorboards. Get off me! He is trespassing, David stated calmly, looking up at me while keeping Preston entirely immobilized. Would you like the authorities notified, Ms. Harrison? I looked down at the man who had tried to destroy my family. He was writhing on the floor. His expensive tuxedo ruined his dignity, shattered his entire fraudulent existence, exposed to the most powerful people in the city. Yes, I replied, my voice cold and unwavering. Call the police. Have him arrested for trespassing and inform the arriving officers that my legal team will be filing multiple charges for fraud and forgery in the morning. I turned my back on Preston, leaving him pinned to the floor by my security team. I looked out at the audience one final time. My mother was sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. My father looked like an empty shell. Chloe was staring blankly at the wall, her mind unable to process her new reality. I walked calmly down the stairs opposite the struggle, moving away from the stage and back into the crowd. The guests parted for me, offering wide berths of silent, fearful respect. I walked straight to the back corner of the room near the kitchen doors where my husband stood waiting. Malik held out his hand. I took it, feeling the rough, warm calluses of a man who built his life on truth. Zara smiled up at me, her headphones still securely in place, completely safe from the noise. We turned together and walked out of the grand hall, leaving the wreckage of their lives behind us. We were halfway to the heavy mahogany doors, the sweet taste of absolute victory settling into my bones when Malik suddenly stopped. He squeezed my hand gently, releasing his grip, and then crouched down to kiss Zara on the forehead. I turned to look at him questioning, but his dark eyes were fixed on the front of the room. Behind us, the grand hall was rapidly disintegrating into beautiful, chaotic justice. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by the vicious, rapid-fire outrage of Atlanta high society. Voices rose in a tidal wave of anger and betrayal as the reality of Preston and his fraudulent scheme set in. I looked past the furious crowd just in time to see Chloe finally snap. The fragile, glittering illusion of her perfect life had shattered completely, and the jagged pieces were tearing her apart from the inside out. She let out a guttural, terrifying shriek that cut through the noise of the room. She launched herself at Preston, where he lay pinned on the floor by my security team. Her fists flew blindly, slapping him across the face and chest, her diamond rings catching the stage lights as she tore at his ruined tuxedo jacket. She was screaming incoherently, a complete and total meltdown of a woman who realized she was suddenly penniless. The security guards did not intervene. They simply leaned back slightly, keeping Preston immobilized while Chloe unleashed her absolute fury upon the man who had doomed her. At the front table, my mother Yvonne physically crumpled. Her knees seemed to give out all at once, and she collapsed heavily into her chair like a marionette with its strings cut. She stared blankly at the stained tablecloth, her chest heaving in rapid, shallow breaths. The state senators, the corporate executives, and the socialites she worshipped were actively scrambling away from her table, whispering fiercely to their aides and spouses. She was entirely radioactive. Socially and financially, Yvonne Harrison was dead. Malik slowly unbuttoned his custom-tailored suit jacket. He slipped it off his broad shoulders with casual grace and draped it over the back of an empty chair near the exit. He adjusted his pristine white cuffs, his face a portrait of utter, devastating calm. He looked at me, a sharp, knowing glint in his eyes, before turning back toward the chaos. He walked down the center aisle with the slow, deliberate stride of an apex predator claiming its territory. The angry murmurs of the crowd began to quiet down instantly as they noticed him. The sheer magnetism of his presence commanded absolute silence. They parted for him just as they had parted for me, their eyes tracking the man they had spent the entire evening dismissing as a lowly street vendor. Malik stepped up the short, carpeted stairs to the stage. He effortlessly bypassed the thrashing, sobbing mess of Chloe and Preston, completely ignoring them, as if they were nothing more than tragic debris on the floor. He stepped up to the wooden podium and picked up the microphone I had dropped moments earlier. He tapped the metal grill once. The sharp sound echoed through the speakers, instantly silencing whatever lingering chatter remained in the room. He looked out over the sea of wealthy investors and offered them a warm, impeccably polite smile. "Good evening again," Malik said, his rich baritone voice echoing smoothly across the hall. "My wife has thoroughly addressed the real estate portion of tonight's agenda, but there is one final item regarding the hospitality that needs to be cleared up." He looked directly down at my mother. Yvonne slowly lifted her vacant, terrified eyes to meet his gaze. Malik did not look angry. He looked entirely professional, which somehow made it infinitely worse for her. "Yvonne, you have always been incredibly particular about the vendors you associate with," Malik continued, his tone conversational and pleasant. "You made it abundantly clear over the past decade that my food truck business was an embarrassment to your family name. You demanded excellence tonight. You demanded a level of sophistication that you believed I could never comprehend, let alone provide." Malik raised his hand and snapped his fingers toward the audiovisual booth at the back of the room. The massive LED screen behind him shifted instantly. The foreclosure notices vanished, replaced by a meticulously detailed corporate flowchart and a scanned copy of a heavily itemized catering contract. The logo of L'Étoile, the hyper-exclusive French culinary group that had catered the gala, sat at the very bottom of the chart. A bold red line connected it upward through a series of parent companies, supply chain distributors, and luxury hospitality brands. The lines all culminated at the very top of the screen with a single undeniable entity in massive gold lettering. The Sterling Hospitality Group, CEO Malik Johnson. The crowd gasped again, a collective murmur of absolute shock rippling through the room as the realization set in. Malik did not just own a food truck. He owned the entire supply chain. He owned the most prestigious restaurant group in the state. He owned the very culinary empire that these elite socialites spent months trying to get reservations for. L'Étoile is merely a subsidiary, Malik explained, pacing slowly across the stage with total ownership of the room. A pet project I acquired 2 years ago to corner the luxury catering market in the Southeast. The braised short rib you all enjoyed tonight. The vintage champagne you toasted with. The intricate floral arrangements and the antique table settings, they belong to my corporation. The food trucks you mocked were simply the grassroots foundation of a multinational hospitality empire. He turned his attention back to Yvonne, who was now clutching her chest, struggling to pull air into her lungs. "You signed a binding contract with L'Étoile for tonight's gala," Yvonne, Malik said. "You insisted on the absolute finest, sparing no expense to impress your peers and maintain your flawless facade. And because you believed you were dealing with a faceless French conglomerate, you enthusiastically agreed to their standard penalty and liability clauses." The screen zoomed in on the final page of the contract, highlighting Yvonne's elegant signature right next to the total balance due. The number was massive, illuminated in stark white against the dark background. $150,000, Malik read aloud, letting the staggering figure sink into the dead silent room. Due and payable immediately upon the conclusion of the event. Since your son-in-law has fraudulently leveraged all of your liquid assets and your home is currently in the legal possession of my wife's holding company, you have absolutely zero capital to cover this expense. The billing department will be charging this directly to your personal accounts. When those transactions bounce, which we both know they will, the debt will be sent to aggressive corporate collections by tomorrow morning. Malik placed the microphone gently back onto the podium. He did not gloat. He did not raise his voice or exhibit any trace of malice. His absolute, unwavering professionalism was the sharpest blade of all. He had thoroughly and completely dismantled the last remaining shred of their dignity without breaking a sweat. He walked back down the stairs, leaving the elite crowd in stunned awe and my family in absolute irreversible ruins. Preston was currently being hauled to his feet by the security guards, his hands zip-tied behind his back, his face bruised from Chloe's frantic assault. Chloe was curled into a ball on the floor, weeping hysterically into her ruined designer dress. My father was staring blankly at his hands, a broken man who had blindly trusted a snake. And my mother was hyperventilating in her chair, crushed under the weight of a 6-figure debt she could never repay. They had lost their homes, their money, and their honor in the span of 30 minutes. But the most cruel punishment had not stopped there. The heavy oak doors at the main entrance suddenly shuddered under a massive external force. Before anyone inside the grand hall could process the booming sound, the towering floor-to-ceiling arched windows lining the eastern wall were bathed in a frantic, pulsing wash of red and blue light. The harsh strobe effect pierced right through the sheer silk curtains, casting long, distorted, fast-moving shadows across the terrified faces of the Atlanta elite. A fraction of a second later, the unmistakable high-pitched wail of multiple police sirens ripped through the night air. The sound grew deafeningly loud as a fleet of heavy vehicles swarmed the circular driveway of the estate, blocking every possible exit. The crowd, which had been temporarily paralyzed by Malik's devastating exit, broke into a fresh wave of absolute panic. Socialites gasped out loud, clutching their diamond necklaces. Corporate executives and seasoned politicians instinctively backed away from the stage, putting as much physical distance as possible between themselves and the Harrison family. They knew exactly what those sirens meant. When you operate in the upper echelons of extreme wealth, you quickly learn the difference between a local noise complaint and a coordinated federal raid. The main mahogany doors burst open with concussive force crashing against the interior walls. A dozen men and women in dark tactical windbreakers emblazoned with the bright yellow letters FBI flooded into the grand hall. They moved with terrifying synchronized efficiency, bypassing the decorative ice sculptures and the shocked attendees. They were flanked by state financial investigators in sharp gray suits, holding thick leather folders tight to their chests. The lead agent, a tall, stern woman with a silver badge clipped to her belt, marched straight down the center aisle toward the stage. Her boots hit the marble floor with heavy, measured thuds. "Nobody move," she barked, her voice echoing with absolute governmental authority. "Federal agents, we have the building surrounded and secured." She did not even glance at the wealthy onlookers scrambling out of her way. Her eyes were locked directly on the crumpled, sobbing mess of a man pinned to the stage floor by my security team. David, my head of security, looked up at the advancing agents and gave a crisp, professional nod of acknowledgement. He stepped back, pulling Preston roughly to his knees, but keeping a firm, unrelenting grip on the collar of his ruined tuxedo. "Preston Harrison," the lead agent stated, coming to a halt at the base of the short carpeted steps. "You are under arrest for multiple counts of interstate wire fraud, money laundering, and corporate embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Preston let out a high-pitched, animalistic squeal. He thrashed weakly against David's hold, but he was completely drained of energy and hopelessly outmatched. His eyes, wide and bloodshot, darted frantically toward me. "Nia," he choked out, sobbing violently, his face streaked with sweat and tears. "Nia, please. You have your money. You took the houses. You proved your point. Please do not do this to me. Tell them it is a mistake. I will sign whatever you want. I will give it all back. Just call them off, please." I stepped forward, stopping just at the edge of the stage, looking down at him with a gaze colder than Arctic ice. "I do not control the federal government, Preston," I said, my voice perfectly steady, carrying effortlessly over the noise of the agents securing the perimeter of the room. "I just provided them with the reading material. My cybersecurity division at Noir Tech has been monitoring your digital footprint for the past 8 months. Every hidden server you accessed, every encrypted message you sent to your bookies in Macau, every wire transfer you disguised as a charitable donation to this fake foundation. We captured all of it. My team bundled your entire digital life into a neat, heavily encrypted drive and handed it directly to the local FBI field office at 3 o'clock this afternoon. They were just waiting for you to gather all your potential victims in one room so they could make a very loud, very public example out of you." The lead FBI agent signaled to 2 heavily armed officers standing behind her. They marched up the steps, grabbed Preston by his arms, and hauled him roughly to his feet. David smoothly cut the temporary plastic zip ties my team had used, instantly replacing them with the heavy cold steel of federal handcuffs. The metallic click echoed sharply in the silent room, finalizing his total destruction. Chloe let out an agonizing primal scream. She scrambled across the floor, her expensive designer gown tearing at the hem, reaching out desperately for her husband. "Preston!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure terror. "What did you do? What did you do to us? You promised me we were fine." Preston could not even look at her. He hung his head, his chin resting heavily on his chest, weeping openly as the federal agents began to drag him down the aisle. He was a hollowed-out shell of the arrogant man who had taken the stage just an hour ago. Over at the front table, the sheer magnitude of the disgrace finally broke my father. The man who had spent his entire life building a pristine, unblemished reputation was watching his hand-picked golden successor being frog-marched out of a high society gala in federal handcuffs. He staggered backward, clutching his chest with both trembling hands. His face turned an alarming shade of gray, and he gasped for air, his knees buckling completely beneath him. "Richard!" My mother shrieked, snapping out of her own catatonic shock. She lunged forward to catch him as he collapsed against the edge of the table, knocking over a towering centerpiece of white orchids. "Somebody call an ambulance. He cannot breathe. Help him." Several guests who were prominent physicians rushed forward immediately, loosening his silk tie and checking his pulse. He was not having a heart attack, but rather a severe panic-induced angina episode, a visceral physical manifestation of his legacy turning to ash in his mouth. As the doctors lowered him to the floor, he looked up at me through the chaos. His eyes were filled with a horrific mixture of profound regret and absolute despair. He finally saw the brutal truth. He had spent decades elevating a parasitic fraud while burying the only daughter who possessed the strength and intellect to save the family name. It was too late for apologies. I watched the medics rush through the grand doors to attend to him. I felt no joy in his physical pain, but I felt no pity either. They had dug this massive grave with their own two hands, and now they were falling into it. The lead FBI agent turned her attention to Chloe, who was still sobbing hysterically on the floor. "Mrs. Harrison," the agent said, her tone completely devoid of any sympathy, "we have a federal warrant to seize all electronic devices, vehicles, and personal assets belonging to you and your husband. Agents are currently at your residence, confiscating your property as we speak. You will need to come with us to the field office for questioning regarding your knowledge of the fraudulent accounts and the forged mortgage documents." Chloe shook her head wildly, crawling backward like a frightened child. "I did not know," she screamed, mascara running down her face in thick black rivers, ruining her flawless makeup. "I swear I did not know anything about the money. He told me he was successful. He told me the money was from his real estate investments. I am innocent. You cannot take my things. You can explain your innocence to the federal prosecutors," the agent replied, gesturing for a female officer to assist Chloe to her feet. The entire room watched in morbid fascination as the golden couple of Atlanta high society was escorted out of the building, completely stripped of their wealth, their freedom, and their dignity. The flashing police lights from the driveway painted their retreating figures in harsh, unforgiving colors. The socialites who had previously kissed Chloe's cheeks were now actively pulling their phones out to record her downfall, whispering viciously behind their hands. I turned away from the spectacle and walked down the side steps of the stage. The crowd continued to part for me, the executioner who had orchestrated this masterpiece of ruin. I walked straight toward the exit where Malik was waiting for me. Zara was held safely in his strong arms, fast asleep against his shoulder, her noise-canceling headphones still firmly in place. Malik extended his free hand. I took it, feeling a profound, deep-seated sense of closure wash over my entire body. The storm had finally passed. The ledger was balanced. We walked out the side doors into the cool, crisp night air, leaving the crumbling ruins of the Harrison family behind to deal with the federal consequences of their own blinding arrogance. I did not make it to the back doors. As my foot hit the final carpeted step of the stage, a frantic, desperate weight suddenly anchored me to the floor. I stopped, turning slowly. Yvonne had abandoned her husband to the paramedics. The illusion of her perfect marriage, the health of the man she had spent decades standing beside, was completely secondary to the imminent loss of her physical kingdom. She was on her knees at the base of the stairs. Her impeccably styled hair was a bird nest of loose strands. The heavy silver beadwork of her gown scraped harshly against the marble floor as she lunged forward, grabbing the heavy emerald silk of my dress with both hands. Her knuckles were white. Her face was streaked with tears and smeared designer makeup. She looked up at me, and a camera tracking this moment would have slowly pushed in, capturing the absolute terrifying stillness of my face. There was not a single tear in my eyes. There was no pity. There was only a cold, smooth void. "Nia, please," Yvonne sobbed, her voice cracking an ugly, desperate sound that echoed off the high ceilings. "You cannot do this. You cannot take the house. It is our legacy. It is everything we have built. Please, I am begging you. I am your mother. You have to withdraw the foreclosure. You have the power to stop this. Save our honor. Save our family name. Do not let them throw us out on the street." She was gasping for air, gripping the fabric of my dress like it was a life preserver. The woman who had spent 30 years looking down her nose at me, who had hidden me away in corners, who had treated my husband like a servant and my daughter like a nuisance, was now weeping at my feet. The flashing red and blue lights from the police cruisers outside cut through the tall windows, casting harsh, jagged shadows across her desperate face. Before I could respond, another weight crashed against the wooden banister of the stairs. Chloe scrambled over her couture gown, torn at the knee. She practically threw herself next to our mother, her face a mask of absolute terror and ruthless self-preservation. She did not reach for my dress, but she clasped her hands together in a frantic, pleading gesture. "Nia, listen to me," Chloe begged, her voice shrill and panicked over the distant wail of sirens. I did not know. I swear to God I did not know what Preston was doing. He lied to me. He is a monster. He manipulated all of us. You cannot punish me for his crimes. I am a victim here too. Please, Nia, you cannot take my home. Where will I go? I am your sister. You have to let me keep the house. It was all Preston. I hate him. I will divorce him tomorrow. Just please do not take my house. I looked down at the two of them, the golden child and the matriarch, the two women who had defined the parameters of my misery for 3 decades. In the span of an hour, they had shed every ounce of their manufactured grace and dignity. Chloe was willing to throw the husband she had flaunted to the wolves without a second thought, sacrificing him instantly to save her material possessions. Yvonne was willing to crawl on the floor in front of the same high society she worshipped, begging the daughter she despised for a roof over her head. I stood perfectly still, letting the silence stretch between us. The ambient noise of the grand hall, the shouts of the federal agents securing evidence, the frantic murmurs of the fleeing elite faded into a dull static hum. I slowly reached down. I did not offer them my hand. I simply took hold of the emerald silk of my gown, where Yvonne was gripping it. I peeled her fingers back one by one with firm, unrelenting pressure. She whimpered, but she let go. I straightened my posture, looking directly down into my mother's eyes. "Earlier tonight, you told me you were tired of my family," I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried a razor-sharp edge that cut through her sobbing. "You told me my husband was an embarrassment, and my daughter was a mistake. You told me we did not belong in your world." Yvonne shook her head wildly, reaching out again, but stopping short of touching me. "I did not mean it, Nia. I was stressed. I was just worried about the gala. Please, you know how I get." "I know exactly how you get," I replied, my tone dropping to a sub-zero temperature. "I know that you have never once loved me. I know that you only value what you can show off. And right now you have absolutely nothing left to display. You wanted to protect your legacy. Your legacy is currently being loaded into the back of a federal transport vehicle." I shifted my gaze to Chloe, who was shaking uncontrollably. "And you, Chloe, you stood by and watched your husband steal from your own parents. You ignored the warnings because you liked the designer bags and the luxury cars too much to ask questions. You are not a victim. You are an accomplice who just ran out of luck." "Nia, please." Chloe whimpered, tears dripping off her chin, falling onto the antique carpet she had prized so highly. "Do not worry, Mom," I said, bringing my attention back to Yvonne. The slow push-in of the imaginary camera would have captured the exact moment the last fragile thread of my familial bond completely dissolved. "You do not have to be tired of my family anymore, because as of this exact second, I am permanently severing this bloodline. I have no mother, I have no sister, I have no father." Yvonne let out a choked, agonizing gasp, covering her mouth with her trembling hands as she slumped forward against the base of the stairs. "You wanted me to leave," I continued, leaning down slightly so they could hear the absolute finality in my voice. "So I am leaving. But I am taking my property with me. On Monday morning, my legal team will arrive at both estates. They will be accompanied by local law enforcement and moving crews. You have until 8 o'clock Monday morning to pack whatever personal items the federal government does not seize first. If you are not off my property by then, you will be forcibly removed for trespassing. I straightened up, smoothing the front of my gown. I looked at them one last time, committing the image of their ruin to memory, not out of joy, but out of a deep, necessary closure. The ugly duckling had not just grown into a swan. She had grown into a dragon, and she had burned their entire kingdom to ash. I stepped around them. I did not look back. I walked across the remaining distance of the grand hall. Malik was waiting for me near the exit doors. He had watched the entire exchange, his face a mask of calm, protective strength. He reached out and took my hand, his warm, rough palm grounding me instantly. Zara was safe against his chest, oblivious to the destruction behind us, her head resting peacefully on his shoulder. "Let us go home," Malik said quietly. I squeezed his hand tightly. "Yes, let us go home." We walked out the heavy mahogany doors and stepped into the cool night air, leaving the flashing police lights, the federal agents, and the shattered remnants of the Harrison family far behind us. The crisp breeze felt like a physical baptism, washing away 30 years of inadequate feeling and rejection. I was finally free. We moved with deliberate grace down the long, sweeping red carpet that had been laid out across the grand front steps of the estate. If this were a movie, the camera would be positioned directly behind us, tracking our slow, steady descent into the night. We walked shoulder to shoulder, a unified, impenetrable front, moving in the exact opposite direction of the absolute chaos unfolding all around us. The massive oak doors of the mansion remained open behind us, spilling the frantic, panicked noises of the Atlanta elite out into the humid evening air. Dozens of guests who had previously glided up these very same steps with arrogant entitlement were now scrambling past us in a desperate, terrified stampede. Women in heavy couture gowns tripped over their own hems, their faces pale and illuminated by the aggressive strobe of the police cruisers. Powerful executives barked frantically into their cell phones, screaming at their legal teams to distance them from Preston Harrison immediately. The valet station was a scene of total anarchy, with wealthy attendees throwing cash at the panicked drivers, begging for their vehicles to be brought around before the federal agents decided to lock down the entire perimeter. They shoved each other aside, abandoning all pretense of high society manners. Their civilized masks had completely melted away, revealing the terrified self-serving creatures underneath. I did not flinch as a state senator brushed past my shoulder. I did not break my stride as a prominent real estate developer cursed loudly at a police officer blocking his path. We walked directly through the center of the madness, untouchable and serene. I looked at Malik. The harsh red and blue lights washed over his sharp profile, but his expression remained a portrait of absolute tranquility. He walked with the effortless posture of a man who held the world in the palm of his hand, yet felt no overwhelming need to crush it. His arm was a solid, warm weight against mine, and in his embrace Zara continued to sleep soundly. Her tiny chest rose and fell in a peaceful, rhythmic motion, entirely undisturbed by the destruction of the dynasty occurring just a few feet away. Looking at them, I felt an overwhelming surge of profound clarity. This was my family. This was my wealth. The man who had gladly disguised himself as a lowly street vendor to help me expose the truth, and the child who was the absolute center of our universe. I did not look back, not even once. I felt absolutely no desire to turn my head and catch one last glimpse of the kingdom I had just burned to the ground. Behind me lay the shattering reality of a family that had consistently, aggressively chosen materialism over maternal love. Yvonne Harrison had spent her entire life curating a flawless image, sacrificing her daughter's emotional well-being on the altar of public perception. Chloe had sold her soul for designer labels and country club memberships, marrying a charismatic monster simply because he promised to fund her endless vanity. My father had turned a blind eye to the toxic rot festering inside his own home, as long as the balance sheets looked favorable. They had worshipped at the temple of wealth and prestige, and now their false gods had spectacularly failed them. They were currently trapped inside a crime scene, weeping on the floor, humiliated in front of their peers, stripped of their assets, and facing the cold, unforgiving reality of federal prison sentences and massive corporate collections. The house they loved so much would belong to my holding company by Monday morning. The legacy they protected so fiercely was already a headline on the late-night news networks. We reached the end of the red carpet where our driver was waiting beside a sleek, unmarked black SUV. He quickly opened the rear door, offering a respectful nod. Malik gently maneuvered himself inside, ensuring Zara was settled comfortably into her custom leather car seat, before reaching a hand out to assist me. I gathered the heavy emerald silk of my gown and slid into the quiet, luxurious interior of the vehicle. The heavy doors closed, sealing us off from the blaring sirens and the frantic shouts of the ruined elite. As the car glided smoothly down the winding, tree-lined driveway, passing a line of incoming federal transport vans, I let out a long, slow breath. The oppressive, suffocating weight I had carried since childhood, the constant, desperate need to be seen and validated by people who were incapable of genuine love, finally evaporated completely. The night air had truly washed it all away. The image of that chaotic night fades, dissolving into the quiet, sharp reality of the present. I am sitting perfectly still in a high-backed leather chair in the center of a dimly lit studio space. The background is a deep, fathomless charcoal gray, focusing all the light directly onto my face. I am looking straight into the lens of the camera, holding your gaze with an unwavering, unblinking intensity. My hands are resting calmly on the arms of the chair. My posture is relaxed but commanding. Society teaches us to revere the concept of family above all else. We are conditioned from birth to believe that blood is a sacred, unbreakable bond. We are told to forgive the unforgivable, to swallow our pride, to turn the other cheek, and to endlessly accommodate the people who share our genetics. We are instructed to keep the peace, even if that peace requires us to silently endure a lifetime of emotional warfare. But blood does not automatically grant someone the right to destroy your spirit. Sharing a last name does not give anyone permission to treat you as a stepping stone, a scapegoat, or a shadow. For years, I allowed myself to be diminished by people who measured my worth by what I could not provide them. I let them convince me that I was the problem, that my quiet nature and my unconventional choices were profound disappointments. I sat in the darkness they created for me, believing I did not deserve to stand in the light. But darkness is a remarkable teacher. It teaches you how to see the truth without the distracting glare of beautiful illusions. It teaches you how to build your own strength in absolute silence. It teaches you how to gather your resources meticulously, patiently, and ruthlessly until you are fully prepared to strike. When you finally realize your own value, you stop asking for a seat at a table where you are continuously being served poison. You stop trying to prove your worth to people who are entirely committed to misunderstanding you. You simply get up, you walk away, and you build your own table. And if those same people attempt to drag you back down, if they try to manipulate your success to cover their own failures, you do not owe them your grace. You do not owe them your silence. You owe them the exact brutal consequence of their own actions. I looked directly into the center of the camera lens, my voice dropping to a smooth, chilling whisper. Never apologize for putting out the lights of those who only want to hide you in the dark. Next time, if your family says they are tired of you, make sure you leave them a nightmare to keep them awake for a lifetime. The profound lesson from this story is that your true value is never defined by those who are committed to misunderstanding you. Blood relations do not grant anyone the right to subject you to continuous emotional abuse or manipulate your worth for their own selfish gain. When you stop seeking validation from toxic environments, you free yourself to build genuine power and undeniable success in absolute silence. Setting firm boundaries is not an act of cruelty, it is the ultimate form of self-respect. True justice occurs when you step into your light and let those who thrived in your shadows face the brutal, unavoidable consequences of their own actions. If you have ever had to walk away from a toxic environment to protect your peace, share your story in the comments below and hit subscribe for more empowering content.